Fox's clever plan. Once upon a time, in a deep, mysterious forest, there lived a fox named Felix. Felix was known far and wide for his intelligence and his cunning nature. While most of the animals respected him for his sharp wit, some feared him, knowing that he was always up to something. Felix had a reputation for coming up with clever plans, whether it was to find food or to avoid trouble. One day, as Felix was strolling through the woods, he overheard two rabbits, Oliver and Daisy, whispering about a grand feast being held by the farm animals on the other side of the forest. The farm animals had decided to celebrate a year of good harvest, and the feast would be full of delicious fruits, vegetables, and bread. Felix's ears perked up. He imagined himself savoring all the delightful treats, and his mouth started to water. However, Felix knew he couldn't simply walk into the farmyard. The farm animals were always wary of him, and there were guards, two strong dogs named Bruno and Max, protecting the entrance. Felix would have to be very clever to get past them. So, he sat down under a tree, his bushy tail curled around him, and started to think. After a while, a sly smile spread across his face. He had a plan. The next morning, Felix gathered some bright red berries from the forest and smeared them all over his fur. He rolled in the dirt to make himself look disheveled and weak. Then, he slowly made his way towards the farm, limping and groaning. As he approached the entrance, Bruno and Max noticed him right away. They stood up, growling, their eyes fixed on Felix. "Stay back, Felix," Bruno barked. "We know your tricks. You can't fool us." Felix coughed weakly and collapsed on the ground, barely able to lift his head. "Please, help me," he said in a faint voice. "I've eaten something bad. I think I'm dying. I just need a little food. Just a little to regain my strength." Max narrowed his eyes. "Why should we help you? You've caused nothing but trouble for everyone here." Felix let out a pitiful whimper. I know I've made mistakes, but everyone deserves kindness when they're in need, right? I promise, I won't cause any harm. Just let me have a little food, and I'll leave." Bruno and Max exchanged glances. They were tough, but they weren't heartless. After a moment of hesitation, Bruno sighed. "Fine, we'll let you in, but only for a little while, and we'll be watching you." Felix nodded weakly, trying to hide the grin that was threatening to spread across his face. The two dogs led him into the farmyard, where the feast was set up. Felix's eyes widened at the sight of all the food: baskets of apples, piles of carrots, loaves of bread, and even a large pot of vegetable stew. He could barely contain his excitement. The farm animals, seeing Felix in such a sorry state, murmured among themselves. Some were suspicious, but others felt pity for the poor fox. They allowed him to sit near the feast, and Bruno handed him a small piece of bread. Felix nibbled on it slowly, all the while eyeing the other treats. He needed a distraction, something that would allow him to grab as much food as he could and make a run for it. Just then, Felix noticed a group of chickens pecking at some grain nearby. He had an idea. Felix let out a sudden, loud groan and rolled over, knocking over a basket of apples. The apples tumbled across the ground, causing the chickens to squawk and flap their wings in panic. The commotion caught everyone's attention. Bruno and Max rushed over to calm the chickens, leaving Felix unattended. Seizing the opportunity, Felix leaped to his feet, grabbed a loaf of bread and a bunch of carrots, and dashed towards the forest. The farm animals shouted in surprise, and Bruno and Max turned just in time to see Felix disappearing into the trees, his laughter echoing behind him. Felix ran until he was deep in the forest, far away from the farm. He sat down, catching his breath, and looked at the food he had managed to steal. He chuckled to himself, pleased with how well his plan had worked. They should have known better than to trust a fox, he said aloud, taking a big bite of the bread. But just as Felix was about to enjoy his meal, he heard a rustling sound behind him. He turned around, and to his shock, there stood Bruno and Max, panting but furious. They had followed his scent all the way from the farm. Felix's eyes widened in fear as the two dogs stepped closer. "You thought you could trick us and get away with it," Max growled. Felix tried to smile, but it came out as a nervous grimace. Now, boys. Let's not be hasty." But it was too late. Bruno and Max lunged at Felix, and the clever fox found himself running for his life, his stolen feast forgotten on the forest floor. As he sprinted away, Felix realized that sometimes even the cleverest plans could have unexpected consequences. Ant Big Dream. In a bustling meadow, there lived an ant named Arlo. Arlo was different from the other ants in his colony. While his fellow ants were content with collecting food and building their underground tunnels, Arlo had a big dream. He wanted to see the world beyond the meadow, to explore places no ant had ever been before. The other ants often laughed at him, telling him that an ant's place was in the colony, working hard for the community. But Arlo couldn't shake off the feeling that he was meant for something more. One day, as Arlo was out gathering seeds, he noticed something unusual. A large, colorful balloon had landed in the meadow. It was tied to a wooden basket, and it looked like it had drifted away from some human celebration. Arlo's eyes widened as an idea began to form in his mind. He could use the balloon to travel. It was the perfect chance to fulfill his dream of seeing the world. Arlo worked tirelessly, gnawing at the rope that held the balloon down. He knew it was risky, but he was determined. After hours of effort, the rope finally snapped, and the balloon began to rise. Without hesitation, Arlo climbed into the basket, holding on tightly as the balloon lifted off the ground. The wind carried him higher and higher, and soon the meadow looked like a tiny green patch far below. Arlo's heart raced with excitement. He was finally free, soaring above the world. As the balloon drifted, Arlo saw incredible sights. He floated over a shimmering lake, where fish jumped out of the water, their scales glistening in the sunlight. He passed over a dense forest, where he could see birds nesting in the treetops and deer grazing in the clearings. Arlo felt a sense of wonder he had never experienced before. This was exactly what he had dreamed of: freedom, adventure, and the beauty of the world. But as the sun began to set, Arlo realized he had a problem. The balloon was still drifting, and he had no way to control where it was going. The wind was picking up, and the once peaceful ride was becoming a wild, uncontrollable journey. Arlo's excitement turned to fear as the balloon was blown towards a dark, stormy cloud. The sky rumbled, and Arlo held on tightly as the wind whipped the basket back and forth. He had wanted adventure, but now he wasn't sure if he would survive it. Suddenly, a powerful gust of wind blew the balloon towards a tall tree. The branches reached out like giant hands, and the basket got caught in the thick leaves. The balloon deflated, and Arlo found himself dangling precariously from a branch. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. He knew he had to find a way down. Carefully, Arlo climbed out of the basket and made his way along the branch, inch by inch, until he reached the trunk of the tree. From there, he slowly descended, his tiny legs gripping the rough bark. When Arlo finally reached the ground, he was exhausted but relieved. He looked around and realized he was far from the meadow, in an unfamiliar part of the forest. For a moment, he felt a pang of fear. He was alone, far from home, and had no idea how to get back. But then he remembered why he had set out in the first place. He had wanted to see the world, to experience the unknown. And here he was, in a place no other ant had ever been. Arlo took a deep breath, and began to explore. He found strange plants with colorful flowers, saw insects he had never seen before, and even discovered a stream with the clearest water he had ever tasted. As night fell, Arlo found a safe place to rest, feeling a sense of accomplishment. He might not know how to get back to the meadow yet, but he had done something incredible. He had followed his dream, faced the dangers, and survived. The next morning, Arlo was woken by a familiar sound, the marching of ants. He looked up and saw a group of ants from his colony, led by his friend Bella. They had been searching for him ever since they noticed the balloon floating away. Bella's eyes widened when she saw Arlo. "Arlo, we thought we'd lost you," she exclaimed. Arlo smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I wanted to see the world," he said, "and I did, but it's good to see you all again." The ants helped Arlo back to the colony, and as they marched, Arlo realized that his dream had come true in more ways than one. He had seen the world, faced his fears, and learned that true adventure was not just about the sights he saw, but about the courage it took to chase his dreams, and the friends who supported him along the way. Kindness saves the day. In a small town nestled between rolling hills, there lived a young woman named Lily. Lily was known for her kindness, always willing to lend a hand to anyone in need. She worked at a local bakery, where she greeted each customer with a warm smile and often slipped an extra cookie into the bags of children who came in with their parents. Though her life was simple, Lily found joy in helping others and making their days a little brighter. One winter evening, as Lily was closing up the bakery, she noticed a man sitting on the curb outside. He looked disheveled, his clothes worn and his face tired. He had a distant look in his eyes, and he was shivering from the cold. Lily hesitated for a moment, then walked over to him, her heart aching at the sight. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. The man looked up at her, his eyes filled with sadness. "I've seen better days," he replied with a faint smile. Lily could tell that he was struggling, and without another thought, she offered him a warm loaf of bread she had just taken from the bakery. "Here, take this," she said. "It's fresh, and it might help a little." The man took the bread, his eyes welling up with tears. "Thank you," he whispered. "You don't know how much this means to me." Lily smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "It's no trouble at all," she said. "If you need more, just let me know." The next day, Lily was back at work, kneading dough and preparing pastries for the morning rush. She had almost forgotten about the man from the night before when the bakery door swung open, and in walked a group of men in suits. They looked out of place in the small, cozy bakery, and Lily felt a twinge of nervousness as they approached the counter. "Are you Lily?" one of the men asked. Lily nodded, her hands covered in flour. "We're looking for the person who helped our friend last night," the man continued. "He's a very important person to us, and we want to thank you." Lily was confused. "Your friend?" she asked. The man nodded. "Yes, the man you gave bread to. You see, he's actually the owner of a large company, but he's been going through a difficult time lately. He wanted to see if there were still kind people in the world, and you proved to him that there are." Lily's eyes widened in shock. She had no idea that the man she had helped was anyone important. To her, he was just someone in need, and she had done what she thought was right. "I didn't do anything special," she said, her cheeks turning pink. "I just gave him some bread." The man in the suit smiled. "Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness make the biggest difference," he said. "Our friend wanted us to give you this." He handed Lily an envelope. She took it, her hands trembling slightly, and opened it. Inside was a letter of thanks, along with a check for a substantial amount of money. Lily gasped, her eyes filling with tears. "I can't accept this," she said, looking up at the man. But he shook his head. "It's a gift," he said. "You helped our friend when he needed it most, and he wants to help you in return." Lily was overwhelmed. She had never expected anything in return for her small act of kindness. She looked at the check, then back at the man. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll use this to help others, just like I helped him." The man nodded, a smile on his face. "I think that's exactly what he'd want you to do," he said. From that day on, Lily used the money to help those in need in her community. She bought warm blankets for the homeless, provided food for struggling families, and even started a small fund to help children buy school supplies. Word of her generosity spread, and soon, others in the town began to contribute as well, inspired by her kindness. Lily had always believed that kindness could change the world, but now she knew it for sure. Her small act of giving bread to a stranger had led to something much bigger, a wave of kindness that spread throughout the entire community. And as she watched the people around her come together to help one another, Lily realized that true wealth wasn't about money. It was about the love and compassion we share with others. And in the end, it wasn't just the man she had helped who found hope again. It was the entire town, brought together by one small act of kindness that had saved the day. The turtle's steady pace. In a tranquil forest by the edge of a sparkling river, there lived a turtle named Toby. Toby was known for his slow and steady nature. He was never in a hurry, always taking his time, whether it was eating, walking, or simply basking in the sun. The other animals in the forest often teased him for his slow pace, calling him Lazy Toby or the Slowpoke. But Toby didn't mind. He believed that everything had its own time and that there was no need to rush. One day, the forest was buzzing with excitement. A grand race had been announced, and it was open to all the animals. The winner would receive a basket full of fresh fruits and vegetables, the finest the forest had to offer. The fastest animals, like the deer, the hare, and the fox, were all eager to compete. They boasted about their speed, confident that one of them would surely win the prize. Toby listened to their chatter from a distance, a small smile on his face. He had no interest in racing. He knew he was no match for the swift-footed animals. But then, something surprising happened. The hare, a particularly arrogant creature named Harvey, pointed at Toby and laughed. "Look at Toby over there. I bet even a rock could move faster than him. Maybe he should join the race. It would be fun to see how far behind he ends up." The other animals laughed, and Toby felt a pang of embarrassment. But instead of retreating into his shell, Toby lifted his head and spoke up. "All right, Harvey," he said calmly. "I'll join the race. Let's see who really wins." The forest fell silent, and the animals exchanged surprised glances. Was Toby serious? Harvey smirked, clearly amused. "You're on, Toby," he said. "But don't be too upset when you lose." The day of the race arrived, and all the animals gathered to watch. The starting line was drawn, and the contestants lined up, the hare, the deer, the fox, and at the end, Toby. The squirrel rang the starting bell, and the animals took off, sprinting down the forest path. Harvey the hare dashed ahead, quickly leaving everyone behind. He was so far in the lead that he decided to take a break under a tree, convinced that no one could catch up to him. Meanwhile, Toby moved at his usual slow and steady pace. He didn't try to rush or push himself beyond his limits. He just kept moving forward, one step at a time. The other animals watched in amusement, some of them even dozing off, assuming that the race was already over. Hours passed, and the sun began to set. Harvey woke up from his nap, yawning and stretching. He looked around and saw no sign of the other racers. "Easy win," he muttered to himself, and began to hop towards the finish line, confident that the prize was his. But as Harvey approached the finish line, he saw something that made his eyes widen in disbelief. There, just a few feet from the finish line, was Toby, still moving slowly but steadily. Harvey panicked and sprinted towards the line, but it was too late. With one final step, Toby crossed the finish line and the forest erupted in cheers. Harvey skidded to a stop, his face flushed with embarrassment. He had underestimated Toby, and now he had lost. The other animals gathered around Toby, congratulating him. They realized that it wasn't speed that had won the race, but persistence and determination. Toby smiled, grateful for the support. Sometimes, it's not about how fast you go, he said, but about not giving up no matter how long it takes. The other animals nodded, understanding the lesson Toby had taught them. The basket of fruits and vegetables was presented to Toby, and he shared it with everyone, including Harvey. The hare, though embarrassed, approached Toby and offered a sincere apology. "I'm sorry for underestimating you, Toby," Harvey said. "I learned a valuable lesson today." Toby nodded, accepting the apology. "We all have our strengths, Harvey. It's important to respect each other's journey." From that day on, the animals of the forest treated Toby with newfound respect. They no longer called him Lazy Toby or the Slowpoke. Instead, they admired his patience and determination, and whenever they felt discouraged or tempted to give up, they remembered Toby's steady pace and how it had led him to victory. The story of Toby's victory spread throughout the forest, becoming a reminder that success wasn't always about being the fastest or the strongest. Sometimes, it was about staying true to oneself, moving forward with purpose and never giving up, no matter how long the journey took. The wolf's second chance. In a dense forest, there lived a wolf named Rafe. Rafe was known far and wide as a fierce predator, feared by the smaller creatures of the forest. He had sharp teeth, a thick coat of gray fur, and a reputation for being relentless. Rafe had always been proud of his strength, and he used it to get what he wanted, no matter who stood in his way. But deep inside, there was a part of him that felt empty, a part that longed for something more than just power. One winter morning, as Rafe roamed the forest in search of food, he heard a soft cry. He followed the sound until he came across a small rabbit caught in a hunter's trap. The rabbit's leg was pinned beneath a metal snare, and it was struggling to free itself, its eyes wide with fear. Rafe approached, and the rabbit froze, expecting the worst. It knew the wolf's reputation, and it had no hope of escape. Rafe stared at the rabbit, his instincts telling him that this was an easy meal. But something stopped him. He saw the terror in the rabbit's eyes, and for the first time, Rafe felt a pang of sympathy. The rabbit was helpless, and it reminded him of a time when he, too, had felt vulnerable. A time when he was a pup, lost and alone in the forest, before he had learned to be strong. Without thinking, Rafe bent down and used his sharp teeth to carefully gnaw at the metal trap. The rabbit watched, its heart pounding, unsure of what the wolf was doing. After a few minutes, the trap snapped open, and the rabbit pulled its leg free. It looked up at Rafe, confused but grateful. "Why did you help me?" the rabbit asked, its voice trembling. Rafe stepped back, surprised by his own actions. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe I'm tired of being feared. Maybe I want to be something more than just a hunter." The rabbit hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you," it said softly, before limping away into the forest. Rafe watched it disappear, a strange warmth spreading through his chest. He had done something good, something that made him feel different, lighter somehow. Days passed, and the news of Rafe's act spread throughout the forest. The animals, who had once avoided him, began to see him in a new light. They still kept their distance, unsure if they could trust him, but they no longer looked at him with the same fear. Rafe, too, began to change. He found himself caring less about his reputation and more about the well-being of the forest and its creatures. One day, as Rafe was resting near a stream, he heard a rustling in the bushes. He turned to see a young deer, its eyes filled with panic. "Help! My fawn is stuck!" The deer cried, its voice filled with desperation. Without hesitation, Rafe followed the deer through the forest until they reached a narrow ravine. At the bottom, a small fawn was trapped, unable to climb out. Rafe looked at the steep walls of the ravine, then at the deer, who was pacing anxiously. "Stay here," Rafe said. He carefully made his way down the side of the ravine, using his claws to grip the rocks. When he reached the bottom, he nudged the fawn gently, encouraging it to stand. The fawn looked up at him, its eyes wide with fear, but Rafe spoke softly. "I'm here to help. Don't be afraid." Slowly, Rafe guided the fawn up the side of the ravine, using his body to shield it from falling. It was a difficult climb, but eventually they reached the top. The mother deer nuzzled her fawn, tears of relief in her eyes. She turned to Rafe, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you." Rafe shook his head. "You don't need to," he said. "I just want to be a part of this forest, not as someone to be feared, but as someone who helps." The deer nodded, and for the first time, Rafe felt truly accepted. He realized that strength wasn't just about power. It was about using that power to protect others, to make a difference. The animals of the forest began to see Rafe not as a predator, but as a protector, someone they could turn to in times of need. Rafe had been given a second chance, and he had taken it. He knew he could never erase the past, but he could choose to be better from that day forward. And as he watched the deer and her fawn disappear into the trees, Rafe felt a sense of peace he had never known before. The peace that came from knowing he had finally found his place in the world. The curious little bird. In a vast forest full of tall trees and hidden wonders, there lived a small bird named Pip. Pip was a curious little bird, always eager to explore and learn about the world around him. Unlike the other birds who were content to stay near their nests, Pip would often venture out, flying far beyond the usual boundaries to see what lay beyond the familiar branches and leaves. One day, as Pip was flying over a part of the forest he had never explored before, he noticed something unusual. A glimmering light was coming from deep within the thick trees, shimmering in a way that made Pip's heart beat faster with excitement. He decided to investigate. He swooped down, navigating through the branches until he found the source of the light, a small, sparkling stone lying on the forest floor. Pip landed beside the stone and stared at it, mesmerized. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. The stone seemed to glow from within, and it changed colors as the sunlight touched it. Pip picked it up gently in his beak and decided to take it back to his nest. He wanted to show it to the other birds, to share this incredible discovery with his friends. As Pip flew back, he couldn't shake the feeling that the stone was special. It was as if it was calling to him, urging him to keep it close. He reached his nest and placed the stone carefully on a bed of leaves. When his friends gathered around, Pip excitedly showed them the stone. But to his surprise, the other birds didn't seem impressed. They looked at it for a moment, then shrugged. "It's just a rock, Pip," one of them said. "Why are you so excited about it?" Pip tried to explain how the stone had glowed and changed colors, but his friends just shook their heads. They didn't see what Pip saw. Feeling disappointed, Pip decided to keep the stone to himself. He tucked it into his nest and decided to watch over it, hoping to understand its mystery. That night, as the forest grew quiet and the moon rose high in the sky, Pip was awoken by a soft humming sound. He opened his eyes and saw that the stone was glowing again, even brighter than before. It pulsed with light, and the humming grew louder. Pip felt a strange urge to follow the sound. He picked up the stone and flew out of his nest, guided by the mysterious glow. The stone led Pip deep into the forest, farther than he had ever been. The trees grew thicker, and the air felt heavy with magic. Eventually, Pip reached a clearing where an old, twisted tree stood alone. The stone's light grew brighter still, and Pip saw something incredible. A door carved into the trunk of the tree, outlined by the glow of the stone. With a mix of fear and excitement, Pip tapped on the door with his beak. Slowly, it creaked open, revealing a dark passageway. Pip hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and stepped inside. The passageway led him downward, and the walls glowed with the same light as the stone. As Pip moved forward, he found himself in a large chamber filled with treasures, golden leaves, sparkling gems, and colorful feathers. But what caught Pip's attention was a large, ancient book resting on a pedestal in the center of the chamber. Pip flew over to the book, his heart pounding. He landed beside it and noticed that the pages were covered in strange symbols and drawings of birds, trees, and stars. As he touched the book with his wing, the stone in his beak began to glow even brighter, and the symbols on the pages shifted, rearranging themselves into words Pip could understand. To those who are curious and brave enough to seek the unknown, the book read, "A gift shall be given, the gift of wisdom and understanding." Pip's eyes widened. He realized that the stone had led him here for a reason. It was a key, a way to unlock the secrets of the forest. He spent the rest of the night in the chamber, reading the book, learning about the magic that flowed through the forest, the hidden connections between all living things, and the power of curiosity. When Pip finally emerged from the tree, the sun was rising. He felt different, wiser, more connected to the world around him. He flew back to his nest, the stone still glowing softly in his beak. This time, he didn't try to show it to the other birds. He knew they might not understand, and that was okay. What mattered was that he had followed his curiosity and discovered something truly extraordinary. From that day on, Pip became known not just as a curious bird, but as the wisest bird in the forest. The other animals began to come to him for advice, and Pip shared what he had learned, guiding them with kindness and understanding. He knew that the real magic wasn't just in the stone or the book. It was in the willingness to explore, to ask questions, and to never stop seeking the unknown. And as Pip looked out over the forest, he knew that his journey was just beginning. There were still so many mysteries to uncover, so many wonders to explore. And with the glowing stone by his side, Pip was ready for whatever adventures lay ahead. Teamwork wins the game. In a small town, there was a soccer team called the Hawks. The Hawks were known for their dedication, but they weren't the best team in the league. They had strong players, but they often played as individuals rather than as a team. Each player wanted to be the star, and this made it difficult for them to win matches. Despite their efforts, they frequently ended up on the losing side, which made them frustrated and divided. One day, the coach, Mr. Thompson, called the team for an important meeting. He had noticed a lack of unity and decided it was time for a change. "Listen up, everyone," he said, his voice firm but encouraging. "I know you all want to win, but if we're going to succeed, we need to start working together. No one player can carry the whole team. We need to trust each other and play as one." The players exchanged uneasy glances. They knew the coach was right, but old habits were hard to break. The Hawks' next match was against the Thunder, the top team in the league. Everyone expected the Thunder to win easily. The Hawks knew they were the underdogs, but they also knew this was their chance to prove themselves. They decided to take the coach's advice to heart. Instead of focusing on individual glory, they would work together and support each other, no matter what. The day of the match arrived, and the Hawks stepped onto the field with a new mindset. From the first whistle, it was clear that something had changed. Instead of trying to score on their own, the players passed the ball, looked for open teammates, and communicated constantly. The Thunder, who had expected an easy win, were caught off guard by the Hawks' newfound teamwork. The first half of the game was intense. The Thunder scored 2 goals, and the Hawks managed to score 1. The Hawks were still behind, but they didn't let it discourage them. They kept playing as a unit, trusting each other, and moving the ball with precision. The crowd could see the difference. The Hawks were no longer just a group of individuals. They were a true team. In the second half, the Hawks' efforts began to pay off. Midfielder Jake, who had always tried to take shots on his own, started passing to his teammates. He saw an opportunity and passed the ball to Alex, who was in a better position. Alex took the shot and scored, tying the game. The crowd erupted in cheers, and the Hawks felt a surge of energy. They could do this. With only a few minutes left on the clock, the score was still tied. The Thunder were getting desperate, trying to break through the Hawks' defense, but the Hawks held their ground. They played with determination, each player covering for the others and making sure no one was left behind. Finally, in the last minute of the game, the Hawks got a corner kick. It was their chance to take the lead. Everyone held their breath as Alex lined up to take the kick. He glanced at his teammates, and they nodded in silent agreement. Alex kicked the ball, sending it sailing through the air towards the goal. The Thunder's defenders rushed to block it, but at that moment, Jake leaped into the air and headed the ball straight into the net. The goalkeeper had no chance. The ball hit the back of the net, and the crowd went wild. The final whistle blew, and the Hawks had won, 3-2. The players hugged each other, laughing and cheering. It wasn't just the victory that made them happy. It was the fact that they had done it together. They had learned to trust each other, to play not for themselves but for the team. The Thunder, who had underestimated them, came over to congratulate them, impressed by their teamwork and determination. After the match, Coach Thompson gathered the team. He had a proud smile on his face. "Today, you showed what it means to be a team," he said. "It wasn't about who scored the most goals or who was the fastest. It was about working together, supporting each other, and never giving up. That's what makes a true champion." The players nodded, their hearts full of pride. They knew they still had a long way to go, but they had taken an important step forward. They had learned that true success wasn't about individual talent. It was about unity, trust, and teamwork. From that day on, the Hawks continued to play with the same spirit. They didn't win every game, but they played with heart, and they played as one. And in the end, that made all the difference. They had learned that, sometimes, the greatest victories weren't just about the score. They were about the bonds formed along the way and the lessons learned together. And as they walked off the field, the Hawks knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as a team. The magic of patience. In a small village surrounded by green hills, there lived a young woman named Eliza. Eliza was known for her ambition and her desire to make things happen quickly. She worked as a potter, crafting beautiful bowls, plates, and vases. Her work was admired by many, but Eliza was never satisfied. She wanted to be the best potter in the village, and she wanted to achieve her goals as fast as possible. One day, an old man named Thomas visited Eliza's workshop. Thomas was a retired potter who had been famous for his work many years ago. He was known for his craftsmanship, and his pieces were still cherished by the villagers. Thomas watched as Eliza worked, her hands moving quickly as she shaped a lump of clay. He could see the frustration on her face as she struggled to make the clay do what she wanted. "You're rushing, my dear," Thomas said gently. "Pottery is an art that requires patience. You cannot force the clay to bend to your will. You must work with it, not against it." Eliza sighed, her shoulders tense. "But I want to be the best," she said. "I want to make the most beautiful pieces, just like you did. I don't have time to waste." Thomas smiled. "Let me tell you a story," he said. "Many years ago, I, too, was impatient. I wanted to be the best potter, and I thought that the faster I worked, the sooner I would reach my goal. But one day, something happened that changed my perspective." Eliza paused her work, curious. Thomas continued. "I was working on a special vase, one that I wanted to be perfect. I rushed through the process, eager to finish it. When it was time to fire the vase in the kiln, I didn't wait for it to dry properly. I wanted it done quickly, so I put it in the kiln too soon. Thomas's eyes grew distant as he remembered. When I opened the kiln, the vase had cracked. It was ruined. All my hard work had been for nothing, simply because I lacked patience. I learned a valuable lesson that day. Some things cannot be rushed. True beauty takes time. Eliza listened, her expression softening. She looked at the clay in her hands, realizing that she had been trying to force it, just as Thomas had done with his vase. She took a deep breath and decided to start over, this time moving more slowly, feeling the clay and allowing it to guide her hands. Days passed, and Eliza practiced patience. She took her time with each piece, shaping the clay carefully and allowing it to dry properly before firing it. She began to notice a change in her work. The bowls and vases she made were smoother, more elegant, and more beautiful than anything she had created before. The villagers noticed too, and soon, people from neighboring towns came to see her work and buy her pottery. One day, Eliza decided to create a special piece, a large, intricate vase with delicate patterns carved into its surface. She spent weeks working on it, taking her time to make sure every detail was perfect. When it was finally finished, she carefully placed it in the kiln, remembering Thomas's story and the importance of patience. When the vase came out of the kiln, it was flawless. The villagers gathered to see it, and they marveled at its beauty. Thomas, who had been watching from a distance, smiled and approached Eliza. "You see, my dear," he said, "there is magic in patience. It allows you to create something truly special, something that cannot be achieved through haste." Eliza nodded, her heart filled with gratitude. She had learned that being the best wasn't about rushing or forcing things to happen. It was about taking the time to do things right, about working with care and dedication. She turned to Thomas, her eyes shining. "Thank you for teaching me this," she said. "I understand now that true beauty cannot be rushed." Thomas patted her shoulder. "You have learned well, Eliza. Remember, the magic of patience is not just in pottery, it's in life. Good things come to those who wait and work with care." From that day on, Eliza continued her work, but with a new perspective. She no longer rushed or felt frustrated. Instead, she embraced the process, knowing that patience would lead to something beautiful. Her pottery became known throughout the region, not just for its beauty, but for the story behind it. The story of a young woman who learned the magic of patience and used it to create something truly extraordinary. And as Eliza looked at her finished pieces, she knew that Thomas was right. There was magic in patience, a magic that transformed not only her pottery, but also her life. The Lost Golden Feather. In a faraway kingdom, there lived a young man named Leo. Leo was a humble farmer who spent his days tending to his fields and caring for his animals. He had a simple but content life, though he often dreamed of something more: adventure, mystery, and perhaps a touch of magic. Little did he know that one day, his life would take a surprising turn. One morning, as Leo was working in his field, he noticed something shimmering in the sunlight. He approached it, and to his amazement, he found a golden feather lying in the grass. It was unlike any feather he had ever seen. It glowed with an otherworldly light, and it was warm to the touch. Leo knew immediately that this feather was special, perhaps even magical. He decided to take the feather to the village elder, an old woman named Agnes, who was known for her wisdom and knowledge of the old tales. When Agnes saw the feather, her eyes widened in shock. "This is no ordinary feather," she said, her voice trembling. "It belongs to the golden phoenix, a mythical bird said to bring prosperity and protection to our kingdom. But if the feather is here, it means the phoenix is in trouble. You must return it, Leo. The fate of our kingdom may depend on it." Leo's heart raced. He had always wanted an adventure, but this was more than he had bargained for. Still, he knew he couldn't ignore Agnes's words. He agreed to set out on a journey, to find the golden phoenix and return the feather. Agnes gave him a map that showed the way to the enchanted forest, where the phoenix was said to reside. The journey was long and difficult. Leo traveled for days, crossing rivers, climbing steep hills, and navigating through dense woods. He faced many challenges along the way, wild animals, treacherous paths, and stormy weather. But he held on to the golden feather, its glow guiding him through the darkest moments. Finally, Leo reached the enchanted forest. The trees were tall and twisted, their branches forming a thick canopy that blocked out the sun. The air was thick with magic, and Leo could feel the power of the forest all around him. He followed the map until he reached a clearing, where he saw a large nest made of golden twigs. In the center of the nest sat the golden phoenix, its wings drooping and its eyes filled with sadness. Leo approached cautiously, holding out the feather. The phoenix looked at him, and its eyes seemed to brighten. "You have brought back what was lost," the bird said, its voice echoing in Leo's mind. "I was captured by a dark force, and without my feather, I could not escape. But now I am free." With a graceful movement, the phoenix took the feather from Leo and placed it back among its plumage. The moment the feather was returned, the phoenix spread its wings, and a brilliant light filled the clearing. The trees seemed to come alive, their leaves glowing with golden light. The phoenix rose into the air, its powerful wings flapping, and Leo watched in awe as the bird flew higher and higher, disappearing into the sky. Just as Leo was about to leave the clearing, he heard a voice. It was soft but clear, and it seemed to come from the forest itself. "You have shown great courage and kindness, young one," the voice said. "For your bravery, you shall be rewarded." Suddenly, a golden light surrounded Leo, and he felt a warmth spread through his body. When the light faded, he found himself holding a small golden amulet in his hand. Leo returned to his village, the amulet hanging around his neck. He was greeted as a hero, and the village celebrated his return. The field seemed to flourish more than ever, and the villagers believed that the golden phoenix had blessed them with prosperity. Leo, however, knew that the true reward was not the amulet or the admiration of the villagers. It was the journey itself, the courage he had found within himself, and the knowledge that he had helped a magical creature in need. From that day on, Leo continued his life as a farmer, but he was no longer the same. He had faced dangers, experienced magic, and discovered the power of kindness and bravery. And though his life was still simple, it was now filled with a sense of wonder and adventure that he carried with him every day. And whenever he looked at the golden amulet, he remembered the golden phoenix and the lesson he had learned, that sometimes the greatest adventures come when you least expect them, and true magic lies in the courage to do what is right, even when the path is difficult. Secrets of the Old Tree. In a quiet village surrounded by lush green fields, there was an ancient oak tree standing tall at the edge of the forest. The villagers called it the Old Tree, and it was said to be the oldest living thing in the area. Children often played under its branches, and the elders would sit in its shade, telling stories of the tree's mysterious past. One of those stories claimed that the old tree held secrets that could change the lives of those who were brave enough to seek them. Among the villagers, there was a young woman named Clara. Clara had always been curious about the stories of the old tree. She had heard whispers about hidden treasures and forgotten magic, and her imagination ran wild with possibilities. Unlike others who dismissed the stories as mere legends, Clara believed there was some truth to them. One summer evening, she decided it was time to find out for herself. Clara waited until dusk, when the village had quieted down, and made her way to the edge of the forest. The old tree loomed ahead, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. As she approached, she noticed something she had never seen before, a small hollow in the trunk, just at eye level. It seemed to glow faintly, as if inviting her to come closer. With her heart pounding, Clara reached into the hollow and felt something smooth and cold. She pulled out a small, ornate key. It was unlike any key she had ever seen, with intricate carvings and a shimmering golden hue. Clara knew instantly that this key was special, and she had to find out what it unlocked. The next day, Clara returned to the old tree, determined to uncover its secrets. She examined the trunk carefully, searching for any clue that might lead her to the keyhole. After a while, she noticed a patch of bark that looked different from the rest, as if it had been carved with care long ago. Clara pressed the key against the bark, and to her amazement, the bark shifted, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside the compartment, Clara found an old, leather-bound book. It was dusty, and the pages were yellowed with age. The cover had no title, just a symbol that resembled the shape of the old tree. Clara opened the book and found that it was filled with drawings and writings in a language she didn't recognize. But there were also pictures that seemed to tell a story. Clara spent hours studying the book, trying to make sense of the drawings. Slowly, she began to piece together the story. It was about a guardian, someone chosen by the forest to protect its secrets and keep the balance of nature. The book described how the guardian would receive a key from the old tree, a key that would unlock not only hidden compartments, but also hidden abilities within the guardian. As Clara read on, she realized that the story was talking about her. The key, the book, the old tree, it was all meant for her. She was the new guardian, chosen by the forest to protect its secrets. Clara felt a mix of fear and excitement. She had always wanted adventure, but she never imagined she would be part of something so important. That night, Clara returned to the old tree with the book in her hands. She placed her hand on the trunk, and to her surprise, the tree seemed to respond. The leaves rustled, and a gentle breeze wrapped around her, as if the forest itself was acknowledging her. Clara knew then that her life would never be the same. She had a responsibility now, to protect the forest, to learn its secrets, and to keep the balance that had been entrusted to her. But Clara's newfound role came with challenges. Over the next few weeks, she noticed changes in herself. She could sense the moods of the forest, hear whispers in the wind, and feel the pulse of life all around her. It was overwhelming at times, but Clara embraced it, knowing that the old tree had chosen her for a reason. One evening, as Clara was walking through the forest, she saw something strange. A group of men with axes approaching the old tree. They were talking about cutting it down to make way for a new road. Panic surged through Clara, and she knew she had to act. She stepped forward, her voice steady as she spoke to the men. "You cannot cut down this tree. It is the heart of this forest, and without it, everything will wither." The men looked at her, surprised by her conviction. They hesitated, but one of them stepped forward, frowning. "And who are you to tell us what we can and cannot do?" Clara took a deep breath, holding up the key. "I am the guardian of this forest. The old tree has chosen me to protect it, and I will not let you harm it." The men exchanged uneasy glances. There was something about Clara, the way she spoke, the determination in her eyes, that made them pause. Slowly, they lowered their axes, and one by one, they turned and left, leaving Clara alone with the old tree. Clara placed her hand on the trunk, feeling the warmth of the tree beneath her palm. She had done it. She had protected the forest, just as the book had said she would. And as the sun set behind the hills, Clara knew that her journey was just beginning. The secrets of the old tree were hers to guard, and she would do so with all her heart. The bee's busy lesson. In a vibrant garden full of blooming flowers, there lived a young bee named Buzz. Buzz was eager and energetic, always buzzing from flower to flower, collecting nectar and bringing it back to the hive. Unlike the other bees, Buzz wanted to prove himself, to show that he could collect more nectar than anyone else. He was determined to be the busiest bee in the entire hive. One morning, Buzz woke up early, even before the sun had fully risen. He stretched his wings and decided that today would be the day he would gather more nectar than any bee had ever gathered before. He darted out of the hive, flying from flower to flower, not stopping to rest or even talk to his fellow bees. Buzz was focused, determined, and in a rush to fill his nectar sacs as quickly as possible. As Buzz worked tirelessly, he noticed an older bee named Mavis moving slowly from one flower to another. Mavis was known for her calm demeanor and her steady work. Buzz couldn't understand why Mavis wasn't working faster. "Why are you so slow, Mavis?" Buzz called out as he zipped past her. "We need to collect as much nectar as we can." Mavis looked at Buzz and smiled gently. "It's not just about how much nectar you collect, Buzz," she said. "It's also about how you do it. If you rush too much, you might miss something important." Buzz shook his head, dismissing her words. He didn't have time for lessons. He had nectar to collect. He flew faster, pushing himself to visit every flower in the garden. He worked until his wings ached, and still, he didn't stop. Buzz was so focused on his goal that he didn't notice the dark clouds gathering in the sky. Suddenly, the wind picked up and the sky turned gray. A storm was coming. The other bees, sensing the change in weather, began to return to the hive. Mavis called out to Buzz, "Come back to the hive, Buzz. A storm is coming." But Buzz ignored her. He was determined to gather just a little more nectar, to prove that he was the best. The first drops of rain began to fall, and soon the gentle drizzle turned into a heavy downpour. Buzz's wings became wet, making it difficult for him to fly. He struggled against the wind, his tiny body being tossed around by the force of the storm. Panic set in as Buzz realized he was too far from the hive. He had pushed himself too hard, and now he was in danger. Just when Buzz thought he might not make it, he saw Mavis flying towards him, her wings steady despite the wind. "Hold on, Buzz," Mavis called out, her voice calm but firm. She reached Buzz and guided him, helping him find shelter under a large leaf. They waited there together until the storm passed, Mavis shielding Buzz from the worst of the rain. When the storm finally ended, Mavis helped Buzz back to the hive. Buzz was exhausted, his wings heavy and his body tired. He felt ashamed as they entered the hive, the other bees looking at him with concern. Mavis, however, simply smiled and patted Buzz on the back. "You're safe now, Buzz. That's what matters." Buzz looked at Mavis, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Mavis," he said quietly. "I was so focused on collecting nectar that I didn't listen. I thought being the busiest meant being the best." Mavis nodded. "There's nothing wrong with working hard, Buzz. But sometimes it's more important to work wisely and take care of yourself. The hive needs all of us, and we can't help if we push ourselves too far." Buzz realized that Mavis was right. He had been so eager to prove himself that he had forgotten the importance of balance and teamwork. From that day on, Buzz still worked hard, but he also took the time to rest, to listen, and to help his fellow bees. He learned that being the best wasn't about doing the most. It was about doing things right and being there for others when they needed him. The other bees noticed a change in Buzz. He was no longer rushing, no longer trying to outdo everyone else. Instead, he worked steadily, and he was always ready to lend a helping wing. And though he might not have collected the most nectar, Buzz became one of the most respected bees in the hive, not for his speed, but for his wisdom and his willingness to learn. And as Buzz looked out over the garden, watching the flowers sway gently in the breeze, he knew that Mavis had given him the most important lesson of all, the magic of patience, balance, and the value of working together. The Hedgehog's New Friends. In a lush forest, there lived a hedgehog named Henry. Henry was known for his sharp quills and his solitary nature. While most of the other animals in the forest enjoyed spending time together, Henry preferred to stay by himself. He believed that his quills made him unsuitable for friendship. After all, who would want to get close to someone who might accidentally hurt them? One sunny morning, as Henry was gathering berries near a patch of wildflowers, he heard laughter coming from a nearby clearing. He looked up and saw a group of animals playing together: a squirrel, a rabbit, and a small deer. They were running around, chasing each other, and their laughter filled the air. Henry watched from a distance, feeling a pang of longing. He wished he could join them, but he knew his quills would only cause trouble. Suddenly, the squirrel, whose name was Sammy, noticed Henry standing by the edge of the clearing. Sammy waved a paw and called out, "Hey, Henry, come join us. We're playing tag." The other animals turned and smiled, nodding in agreement. But Henry shook his head, taking a step back. "I can't," he said softly. "I might hurt you with my quills. It's better if I stay here." The rabbit, named Rosie, hopped over to Henry, her big eyes full of kindness. "We don't mind, Henry," she said. "We just want you to have fun with us. We can be careful." But Henry still hesitated. He had spent so long keeping his distance that the idea of joining in felt almost impossible. Just then, a sudden rustling sound came from the bushes, and the small deer named Daisy froze. Out of the underbrush emerged a fox, its eyes gleaming as it eyed the group of animals. The fox took a step forward, baring its teeth. The other animals huddled together, their faces filled with fear. Henry's heart began to pound. He knew he had to do something. Without thinking, Henry moved in front of his friends, his quills bristling. He puffed himself up, making himself look as large and as intimidating as possible. The fox paused, eyeing Henry warily. It knew that a hedgehog's quills were not to be messed with. After a tense moment, the fox let out a low growl and turned, disappearing back into the forest. The other animals let out a collective sigh of relief. Sammy, Rosie, and Daisy all turned to Henry, their eyes wide with gratitude. "You saved us, Henry," Sammy exclaimed. "Thank you so much." Rosie nodded, her ears twitching. "We knew you were brave, but we didn't know you were this brave." Henry blushed, his quills slowly relaxing. "I just didn't want anything to happen to you," he said. Daisy stepped forward and nuzzled Henry gently. "You may have quills, but that doesn't mean you can't be our friend," she said. "You protected us, and that means a lot." For the first time, Henry felt something warm and comforting spread through his chest. He realized that his quills, which he had always seen as a barrier to friendship, had actually helped him protect the others. Maybe he wasn't as unsuitable for friendship as he had always thought. Sammy grinned and nudged Henry with his paw. "Come on, let's play. We can be careful. And besides, we know you've got our backs if anything happens." Henry hesitated for just a moment before nodding. He followed his new friends into the clearing, a smile spreading across his face. As they played, Henry was careful to keep a bit of distance, making sure his quills didn't accidentally poke anyone. The other animals were mindful too, and soon they found a rhythm that worked for all of them. They laughed and ran together, and for the first time in his life, Henry felt like he truly belonged. When the sun began to set and the animals gathered to rest, Henry looked around at his friends, Sammy, Rosie, and Daisy. He had always believed that his quills made him different, made him unfit for friendship. But now he knew that being different wasn't a bad thing. His quills were a part of who he was, and his friends accepted him just as he was. From that day on, Henry was no longer the solitary hedgehog watching from the sidelines. He was part of the group, playing, laughing, and protecting his friends whenever they needed him. And as the stars began to twinkle above the forest, Henry knew that he had found something truly special. The joy of friendship and the warmth of being accepted, quills and all. Courage of the Shy Deer. In a vast and peaceful forest, there lived a young deer named Willow. Willow was gentle and shy, always keeping to herself and avoiding the company of the other animals. She preferred the quiet corners of the forest, where she could graze peacefully without any attention. The other animals often tried to invite her to their gatherings, but Willow always found a reason to decline. She feared the attention and worried that she would make a fool of herself if she tried to fit in. One day, a great commotion spread through the forest. The animals were gathered near the old oak tree, their voices filled with panic. Willow, who was grazing nearby, cautiously approached to see what was happening. She overheard the worried chatter of the animals. A young fawn had wandered away from its mother and was now lost deep in the forest. The fawn, named Hazel, was very young and had never been far from her family. The forest was vast, and there were many dangers lurking, especially for a small fawn. The mother deer, Lily, was distraught. She paced back and forth, her eyes wide with fear. "I can't find her anywhere," she said, her voice breaking. "She must be so scared." The other animals tried to comfort Lily, but none of them were brave enough to venture deep into the forest to search for Hazel. The deeper parts of the forest were dark and mysterious, filled with thorny underbrush and unfamiliar paths. It was easy to get lost, and the danger of predators made the task even more daunting. Willow stood at the edge of the gathering, her heart pounding. She felt a deep empathy for Lily and the lost fawn. She knew what it was like to be scared and alone. As she watched Lily's distress, something shifted inside her. Despite her shyness and fear, Willow felt an urge she couldn't ignore. She had to help. She couldn't stand by and do nothing while a young fawn was lost and frightened. Taking a deep breath, Willow stepped forward. Her legs trembled, but she spoke up, her voice soft but steady. "I'll go look for Hazel," she said. The other animals turned to her in surprise. Willow had always been the quiet one, the one who stayed away from any kind of attention. But now, here she was, volunteering to do something that none of the others dared to do. Lily's eyes filled with hope. "Thank you, Willow," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, bring my Hazel back." Willow nodded, her heart racing as she turned towards the dark part of the forest. She had never ventured there before, and every instinct told her to stay in the safety of the familiar. But she pushed those thoughts aside, focusing only on Hazel and the promise she had made to bring her back. The deeper Willow went into the forest, the darker and more tangled it became. The branches formed a thick canopy overhead, blocking out the sunlight. Thorny bushes tugged at her fur, and strange sounds echoed around her. Fear gnawed at her, but she kept moving, calling out Hazel's name as she went. After what felt like hours, Willow heard a faint, scared bleat. Her ears perked up, and she followed the sound, carefully navigating through the underbrush. Finally, she found Hazel, huddled under a bush, her small body trembling with fear. Willow's heart swelled with relief. She approached slowly, speaking in a soothing voice. "It's okay, Hazel. I'm here to take you back to your mother." Hazel looked up, her eyes wide and filled with tears. She slowly stood up, and Willow nuzzled her gently, comforting her. "Come on," Willow said softly. "Stay close to me, and we'll get back safely." Hazel nodded, and together, they began the journey back. The way back was just as challenging, but Willow kept her focus. She spoke to Hazel the whole time, reassuring her and keeping her calm. Despite her own fears, Willow found a strength she didn't know she had. She realized that courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about doing what was right, even when fear was present. When Willow and Hazel finally emerged from the dark part of the forest, the other animals cheered, and Lily rushed forward, tears streaming down her face. She nuzzled Hazel, her voice breaking with gratitude. "Thank you, Willow. You saved my baby. I will never forget this." The other animals gathered around Willow, their eyes filled with admiration. For the first time, Willow didn't shy away from the attention. She felt proud, not because of the praise, but because she had faced her fears and helped someone in need. From that day on, Willow was no longer the shy deer who stayed in the shadows. She became a valued member of the forest community, her quiet strength and bravery inspiring others. And though she still cherished her peaceful moments alone, she also learned the joy of being part of something bigger, of having friends who cared for her and whom she could care for in return. And as the sun set over the forest, Willow knew that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about finding the strength to act, even when you were scared, and discovering that sometimes the greatest rewards came from stepping out of your comfort zone. The llama finds home. High in the Andes Mountains, there lived a young llama named Luna. Luna had always wandered from place to place, never staying in one spot for too long. She had no herd, no family, and no place to call home. Her life was a series of endless travels across rocky paths and steep hills. Luna told herself she liked it that way, being free, having no one to answer to, and moving wherever she pleased. But deep down, she often felt a loneliness that she tried to ignore. One day, while crossing a narrow mountain pass, Luna came across a small village nestled in a valley. She had never seen a place like it before. The homes were made of stone, and there were fields full of lush green grass and blooming flowers. She watched from a distance as people worked, children played, and animals grazed peacefully. There was something about the village that drew Luna in, a warmth she had never felt in her travels. Curious, Luna decided to enter the village. She trotted down the path and was soon spotted by a young girl named Isabella. Isabella had always dreamed of having her own llama. When she saw Luna, her eyes lit up with excitement. She ran to her father, pointing towards Luna, and begged him to let her keep the llama. Her father looked at Luna thoughtfully. He could see that she was alone, with no herd or owner, and he nodded. "If the llama wants to stay, she can," he said with a gentle smile. Isabella approached Luna cautiously, holding out her hand. "Hi there," she said softly. "My name is Isabella. Would you like to stay here with us? We have plenty of food, and you wouldn't be alone anymore." Luna looked at the girl, her heart torn. She had always been on her own, and the idea of staying in one place felt strange. But something in Isabella's kind eyes made Luna want to stay, at least for a little while. Days turned into weeks, and Luna found herself settling into life in the village. Isabella took care of her, brushing her fur and feeding her the freshest grass. The other animals in the village welcomed Luna, and soon she had friends to graze with and fields to explore. For the first time in her life, Luna felt what it was like to belong. She no longer wandered aimlessly. She had a place where she was cared for and wanted. But one day, a harsh storm rolled into the valley. The sky turned dark, and the wind howled through the village. The villagers hurried to bring their animals into shelters, and Isabella led Luna to the stable, where she would be safe from the storm. As the rain poured down, Luna stood in the stable, her heart pounding. The wind rattled the doors, and the thunder echoed through the valley. Luna had never experienced a storm like this before, and fear gripped her. Suddenly, Luna heard a faint cry over the howling wind. She perked up her ears and listened. It was coming from outside, a small, frightened bleat. Luna pushed against the stable door, trying to see what was happening. Through the pouring rain, she saw a young goat, separated from the herd, struggling in the mud. The goat was terrified, unable to find its way back to the shelter. Without thinking, Luna pushed the stable door open and ran out into the storm. The rain soaked her fur, and the wind made it difficult to see, but she pressed on. She reached the young goat, nudging it gently with her nose. The goat looked up at her, its eyes wide with fear. Luna lowered her head, letting the goat lean against her as she led it back towards the stable. Isabella, who had been searching for Luna, saw them through the rain. Her eyes filled with tears of relief as she rushed to help. Together, they brought the young goat back to safety. Once they were inside, Isabella wrapped her arms around Luna, her voice trembling. "Thank you, Luna. You were so brave. You saved him." Luna looked at Isabella, and in that moment, she realized something she had never understood before. Home wasn't just a place. It was the people and the connections that made her feel safe and loved. She had found a family in Isabella, and she knew now that she wasn't meant to wander alone forever. When the storm finally passed, the village returned to its peaceful routine. Luna stood in the field, the sun warming her back, and watched as the other animals grazed and the villagers went about their day. She no longer felt the urge to leave, to wander in search of something she couldn't quite name. She had found what she was looking for, a home, a family, and a place where she truly belonged. Honesty brings true rewards. In a bustling village by the river, there lived a young man named Matteo. Matteo worked as a carpenter, making furniture for the villagers. He was skilled with his hands, crafting tables, chairs, and shelves with precision. However, despite his talents, Matteo was not wealthy. He earned enough to get by, but he often dreamed of having more, of being able to live comfortably and provide for his family without worry. One day, as Matteo was walking home from the market, he noticed something unusual. Lying in the middle of the road was a small, heavy bag. He picked it up and felt the weight. It was filled with coins. Matteo opened the bag slightly, and his eyes widened. It was full of gold coins, more money than he had ever seen in his life. His heart pounded as he looked around. There was no one in sight. For a moment, he thought about keeping the money. With this much gold, he could buy a new workshop, new tools, and even a bigger house for his family. But then Matteo remembered the lessons his mother had taught him when he was young, lessons about honesty and doing the right thing, even when it was difficult. He knew someone must be missing this money, and that it wasn't his to keep. With a heavy sigh, Matteo decided to take the bag to the village headman. The headman was an old, wise man named Don Luis, who was respected by everyone in the village. Matteo walked to Don Luis's house and knocked on the door. When the headman answered, Matteo held out the bag of coins. "I found this on the road," he said. I don't know who it belongs to, but I thought it would be best to bring it to you." Don Luis took the bag, his eyes narrowing as he examined it. He looked at Matteo, a smile slowly spreading across his face. "You are an honest man, Matteo," he said. "Not many would have done what you did. Let us see if we can find the owner of this money." The next day, Don Luis called a meeting in the village square. He held up the bag of coins and announced that it had been found. He asked if anyone had lost it. After a moment, an old merchant stepped forward, his face filled with relief. "That is mine," the merchant said. "I must have dropped it on my way to the market. Thank you for finding it. It is all the money I have saved for my family." Don Luis handed the bag to the merchant, who turned to Matteo, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You could have kept this for yourself, but you chose to return it," the merchant said. "I cannot let your honesty go unrewarded. Please, take some of these coins as a token of my appreciation." Matteo shook his head. "I can't accept that," he said. "The money is yours, and I was only doing what was right." The merchant insisted, but Matteo remained firm. He did not want to take what did not belong to him. Finally, the merchant smiled and said, "If you will not take the money, then at least allow me to help you in another way. I have connections in the city, and I can help you get more customers for your carpentry business." Matteo hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you," he said. "That would mean a lot to me." True to his word, the merchant spoke to his friends and contacts, and soon Matteo's carpentry business began to grow. He received orders from the city, and his work became well known for its quality. Matteo was able to provide for his family, and though he never became rich, he was comfortable and content. He knew that his decision to be honest had brought him true rewards, not just in wealth, but in the respect and trust of those around him. One day, as Matteo was working in his workshop, a young boy came in, carrying a small wooden toy that had broken. The boy looked up at Matteo, his eyes full of hope. "Can you fix this?" he asked. Matteo smiled, taking the toy gently from the boy's hands. "Of course," he said. "I can fix anything." And as he worked, Matteo realized that the true reward of his honesty wasn't the money or the business. It was the knowledge that he had done the right thing and that he was someone others could rely on. The villagers often spoke of Matteo's honesty, and his story became a lesson for everyone. A reminder that doing the right thing, even when no one is watching, can lead to rewards far greater than gold. And as Matteo looked around his workshop, filled with the tools and projects that he loved, he knew that he had all he needed. He had earned his place in the village, not through wealth, but through his character, and that was worth more than any bag of gold. The brave little caterpillar. In a peaceful garden filled with colorful flowers, there lived a little caterpillar named Oliver. Oliver was small and timid, always staying close to the ground and munching on leaves. He watched the other insects with admiration. The ladybugs with their shiny red shells, the bees buzzing confidently from flower to flower, and especially the butterflies with their beautiful, colorful wings that carried them high into the sky. Oliver longed to be like them, to be brave and to see the world from above, but he was afraid. One day, a great storm rolled into the garden. The sky turned dark, and the wind howled through the trees. The flowers bent under the force of the wind, and the insects scattered, seeking shelter. Oliver clung to a leaf, his tiny body trembling as the rain poured down. He had never faced anything like this before, and fear gripped him tightly. Suddenly, Oliver noticed something alarming. A small ladybug named Lily was struggling to hold on to a flower petal, her wings too wet to fly. The wind was pushing her closer and closer to the edge of the garden, towards a puddle that had formed below. Oliver's heart pounded. He was scared, but he couldn't just watch while Lily was in danger. Gathering all his courage, Oliver inched his way across the branch, the rain soaking his soft body. The wind pushed against him, but he kept moving, determined to reach Lily. When he finally got to her, he called out, "Grab onto me, Lily. I'll help you." Lily looked at him, her eyes wide with fear, but she reached out, and Oliver carefully pulled her onto the branch. Slowly, he guided her to a safer spot, where they both clung to a sturdy stem until the storm passed. When the storm finally ended, the garden was quiet once more. The sun peeked out from behind the clouds, and the flowers slowly began to lift their heads. Lily looked at Oliver, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Oliver," she said softly. "You saved me. I didn't know you were so brave." Oliver blushed, feeling a warmth spread through him. He had never thought of himself as brave, but in that moment, he realized that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about acting even when you were scared. The other insects gathered around, having seen what Oliver had done. They praised him for his bravery, and for the first time, Oliver felt like he truly belonged. Days passed, and Oliver noticed something strange happening to his body. He felt tired, and his skin felt tight. He found a quiet spot on a sturdy branch and spun himself into a cocoon. The world around him grew still as he rested, wrapped in his silky shell. He didn't know what was happening, but he trusted that it was something important. Time went by, and one warm morning, Oliver felt ready. He pushed against the cocoon, breaking it open, and slowly emerged. As he stretched his body, he realized something incredible. He had wings, beautiful, colorful wings that shimmered in the sunlight. Oliver had transformed into a butterfly. With a sense of wonder, Oliver flapped his wings, feeling the air lift him up. He rose higher and higher, above the flowers, above the branches where he had once crawled. He could see the entire garden, the place that had always been his home, but now from a new perspective. The other insects looked up in awe as Oliver soared above them, his wings carrying him gracefully through the air. Lily the ladybug watched from below, her eyes shining with admiration. "Look at Oliver now," she said to the other insects. "He was always brave, even when he was small. And now he's shown us that true bravery can lead to the most amazing transformations." Oliver flew over the garden, his heart filled with joy. He had faced his fears, helped a friend, and discovered the strength within himself. And now, with his new wings, he was ready to see the world from above, to explore beyond the garden and embrace whatever adventures lay ahead. As Oliver flew into the bright blue sky, he knew that he was no longer just a little caterpillar clinging to the leaves. He was a butterfly, brave and free, ready to take on the world, one flutter at a time, respecting others' differences. In a forest full of diverse animals, there lived a young squirrel named Sammy. Sammy was known for his quick movements and his knack for gathering nuts. He was lively and full of energy, always jumping from tree to tree. Despite his friendly nature, Sammy had a hard time understanding why some animals were so different from him. He often wondered why the turtles moved so slowly, or why the owls only came out at night. Sammy thought that everyone should be just like him, fast, energetic, and always on the move. One day, as Sammy was busy gathering acorns, he noticed a tortoise named Toby struggling to climb over a small rock. Toby moved slowly, his legs short and his shell heavy. Sammy watched for a moment, then hopped over to Toby. "Why are you so slow?" Sammy asked, shaking his head. "If you were faster, you'd get to where you're going in no time." Toby looked up at Sammy, his eyes calm. "I move at my own pace," he said. "It's how I've always been, and I'm fine with it." Sammy shrugged and quickly bounded away, thinking that Toby was missing out on the excitement of moving fast and seeing more of the forest. Later that day, Sammy saw a group of owls perched in a tree. It was still daylight, and the owls were dozing with their eyes half closed. Sammy climbed up the tree and called out, "Why are you all sleeping now? It's the best time to be awake. You're missing all the fun." The owls opened their eyes and blinked at Sammy. "We stay up at night," one of them said. "It's when we feel most alive. We see things in the dark that others can't." Sammy shook his head, not understanding. He thought everyone should enjoy the bright daylight and the warmth of the sun. He couldn't see why anyone would choose to live differently. A few days later, a heavy storm swept through the forest. The wind howled and the rain poured down, turning the ground into slippery mud. Sammy, who had been out gathering acorns, found himself stuck. The wind was too strong for him to climb back up to his nest, and the rain made it impossible for him to move quickly. He shivered, feeling small and vulnerable as the storm raged on. As Sammy struggled, he suddenly saw Toby, the tortoise, slowly making his way towards him. Despite the wind and rain, Toby moved steadily, his shell protecting him from the elements. "Are you all right, Sammy?" Toby asked, his voice gentle. Sammy looked at Toby, surprised. He had always thought of Toby as too slow, but now, Toby's steady pace was exactly what was needed. Toby helped Sammy find shelter under a large bush, where they waited for the storm to pass. As they sat together, Sammy realized that Toby's slow pace wasn't a weakness. It was a strength. Toby was patient, resilient, and able to handle situations that Sammy couldn't. When the storm finally ended, Sammy thanked Toby, his heart filled with gratitude. "I'm sorry for not understanding you before," Sammy said. "I thought being fast was the best way to be, but I see now that everyone has their own strengths." Toby smiled. "We all have our own way of moving through the world, Sammy. There's no right or wrong way, just different ways. Later that night, as the forest grew dark, Sammy climbed up to his nest and looked out at the trees. He saw the owls taking flight, their wings silent as they moved through the night. Sammy watched in awe as they glided effortlessly, their eyes sharp and their movements graceful. He realized that the owls had their own special way of experiencing the forest, one that was just as important as his own. From that day on, Sammy began to appreciate the differences in the animals around him. He learned that the turtles, the owls, the rabbits, and even the insects all had their own unique ways of living, and each way was valuable. He no longer judged them for being different, but instead admired the qualities that made them who they were. One evening, Sammy gathered his friends, Toby, the owls, and the other animals of the forest, and they all shared stories of their lives. Sammy listened with interest, his heart open to the beauty of their differences. He realized that the forest was a richer, more wonderful place because of the diversity of its inhabitants. And as the moon rose over the trees, casting a gentle glow over the forest, Sammy knew that respecting others' differences wasn't just about accepting them. It was about celebrating them and understanding that everyone had something special to offer. The forest was a place where all could thrive, each in their own way, and Sammy felt grateful to be a part of it. The Crow's wise advice. In a quiet village surrounded by fields and forests, there lived a young farmer named Ethan. Ethan was hard-working but often found himself struggling to make ends meet. No matter how much effort he put into his crops, the yield was never enough to provide him with the comfort he desired. Frustrated by his endless toil, Ethan often felt that life was unfair. One day, as Ethan sat under a tree at the edge of his field, feeling disheartened, he noticed a crow perched on a branch above him. The crow was watching him intently, its dark eyes gleaming with intelligence. Ethan sighed and said aloud, "If only I knew the secret to success, maybe my life would be different." To Ethan's surprise, the crow spoke. "Young farmer, I have seen you working tirelessly, yet you are always unhappy. Perhaps I can offer you some advice." Ethan blinked in astonishment. A talking crow? He thought he must be dreaming. But the crow continued, its voice calm and wise. "Listen carefully. To find true success, you must first learn to see beyond what is right in front of you. You must use your mind as well as your hands." Ethan frowned, unsure of what the crow meant. "I work hard every day," he said. "What else can I do?" The crow tilted its head. "Working hard is important, but so is working smart. Look around you, observe, and think. The answers you seek are often right before your eyes." With that, the crow spread its wings and flew away, leaving Ethan to ponder its words. The next morning, Ethan decided to take the crow's advice. Instead of rushing to his fields, he spent time walking through the village and observing the other farmers. He noticed that one of his neighbors, Mr. Thompson, always had healthy crops, even when others struggled. Curious, Ethan watched from a distance and saw that Mr. Thompson used a clever system of irrigation, directing water to his crops in a way that conserved resources and kept the soil moist. Ethan realized that his own fields were often too dry, and that might be why his crops were not thriving. He decided to try something new. Using what he had learned from observing Mr. Thompson, Ethan built an irrigation system for his fields. It took time and effort, but he was determined to make a change. Weeks passed, and Ethan's crops began to improve. The plants grew taller and healthier, and soon his fields were lush and green. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a sense of hope. He understood now that hard work alone wasn't enough. He needed to be observant and adaptable as well. One day, as Ethan was admiring his flourishing fields, he heard a familiar caw. He looked up and saw the crow perched on the same tree as before. The crow nodded approvingly. "You have done well, young farmer. You have learned the value of wisdom and observation. Remember, true success comes not just from effort, but from understanding and adapting. Ethan smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "Thank you," he said. "Your advice has changed everything for me." The crow cawed softly. "Remember this lesson and share it with others. There are many who work hard but do not see the results they desire. Help them understand that sometimes the key to success is not in doing more, but in seeing more." Ethan nodded, and as the crow flew away, he felt a newfound sense of purpose. He began sharing his knowledge with the other farmers in the village, showing them how to improve their irrigation and take better care of their crops. Together, they worked smarter, and soon the entire village began to thrive. Ethan's life changed in ways he had never imagined. He no longer struggled to make ends meet, and he felt a deep sense of fulfillment in helping others. The crow's wise advice had not only transformed his fields, but had also opened his eyes to the importance of sharing knowledge and supporting his community. And so, the young farmer who once sat under a tree feeling defeated became a source of inspiration for others. Ethan had learned that true success was not just about personal gain. It was about lifting others up and growing together. And as the village prospered, Ethan knew that the crow's wisdom would stay with him for the rest of his life. Lessons from the river. In a small village nestled between rolling hills, there flowed a wide, calm river. The river was the heart of the village, providing water for drinking, cooking, and farming. Every day, the villagers would gather by the riverbanks to wash clothes, fetch water, and share stories. Among them was a young man named Ravi. Ravi had always been curious about the river, fascinated by its steady flow and gentle murmurs. He often wondered where it came from and where it went. Ravi was ambitious and dreamed of making a name for himself beyond the village. He wanted to become a merchant and travel to far-off lands, trading goods and seeing new places. But the village elders always told him to be patient, to learn from the river, and to understand its ways before making any big decisions. Ravi, however, was impatient. He didn't understand why they kept referring to the river as if it were a teacher. To him, it was just water flowing from one place to another. One morning, Ravi decided to follow the river. He believed that by understanding where it led, he could find his own path to success. He packed a small bag, said goodbye to his family, and began his journey along the riverbank. At first, the journey was easy. The river was calm, and the path was clear. Ravi walked confidently, imagining the great adventures that awaited him. But as the day went on, the river's character began to change. The banks grew steeper, and the water rushed faster. Ravi found himself climbing over rocks and pushing through thick underbrush. He grew tired, and the excitement he had felt earlier started to fade. The river, which had seemed so inviting, now appeared more unpredictable and wild. Ravi realized that he had underestimated the challenges of following the river's path. Just as he was beginning to lose hope, Ravi spotted an old fisherman sitting by the river's edge, his line cast into the water. The fisherman looked up and smiled. "You look lost, young man," he said, his voice gentle but firm. Ravi sighed and sat down beside him. "I thought I could follow the river and find my way to something greater," he admitted. "But now I feel like I'm just going in circles, with no idea where I'm headed." The fisherman nodded knowingly. "The river is not just a path to follow," he said. "It is a teacher, if you are willing to listen." He pointed to the water, which flowed over rocks and around obstacles, never stopping. The river teaches us that life is not always a straight path. Sometimes we face obstacles, but like the river, we must find a way around them. Sometimes we must be patient, and sometimes we must be strong. Ravi listened, his heart beginning to soften. He realized that he had been trying to force his way forward without understanding the journey. He had been so focused on reaching a destination that he had forgotten to appreciate the lessons along the way. The fisherman smiled and handed Ravi a small, smooth stone. "Take this as a reminder," he said. "The river shapes even the hardest stones over time. Be patient, be persistent, and let life shape you as well." Ravi thanked the fisherman and decided to return to his village. The journey back was not easier, but Ravi saw the river differently now. He noticed how it adapted, how it flowed steadily despite the obstacles in its way. He realized that success was not about rushing to reach a goal, but about learning from each step of the journey. When Ravi returned to the village, the elders welcomed him back. They saw a change in his eyes, a calmness and understanding that hadn't been there before. Ravi no longer felt the need to leave immediately. Instead, he decided to help his family, work in the village, and learn as much as he could. He knew that one day he would leave and pursue his dreams, but he also knew that he needed to be ready, to be shaped by the journey, just like the stones in the river. And so, Ravi stayed, working by the river, learning its lessons and growing stronger and wiser each day. He understood now that the river was more than just water. It was a symbol of life's journey, full of twists and turns, obstacles and moments of calm. And as he watched the river flow, Ravi knew that when the time was right, he would find his own path, one shaped by patience, perseverance, and the lessons he had learned from the river. The Owl's Midnight Journey. In the heart of the dense forest, there lived an old owl named Orla. Orla was known as the wisest creature in the forest. Her large, golden eyes seemed to hold the secrets of the world, and many animals would come to her for advice. She spent her days resting in the hollow of an ancient oak tree, and her nights gliding silently through the forest, observing everything from above. One moonless night, Orla awoke with a strange feeling in her heart. There was an unusual stillness in the forest, and the usual rustling of leaves and chirping of insects was absent. Orla stretched her wings and decided to investigate. She took off from her oak tree, her wings cutting through the darkness as she flew deeper into the forest. As she flew, Orla noticed a faint, eerie glow coming from a clearing far beyond the part of the forest she usually visited. Curiosity piqued. She decided to follow the glow. The deeper she went, the more unfamiliar the forest became. The trees grew taller, their twisted branches forming strange shapes, and the air felt thick with a sense of mystery. When Orla reached the clearing, she saw something astonishing, a circle of glowing mushrooms surrounding a small pond. The light from the mushrooms reflected off the water, creating an ethereal glow that lit up the entire clearing. In the center of the pond stood a young fox, its fur shimmering in the strange light. The fox looked frightened, its eyes wide as it stared at Orla. "Help me," the fox whispered, its voice trembling. "I wandered into this part of the forest and found myself trapped here. The glowing mushrooms won't let me leave." Orla landed gently at the edge of the pond, her eyes scanning the scene. She had heard of the enchanted mushrooms before. They were said to trap any creature that stepped into their circle, holding them until dawn. Orla knew she had to act quickly if she was to help the young fox escape. "Do not be afraid," Orla said calmly. "I will find a way to get you out." She studied the glowing mushrooms, their light pulsing softly as if they were alive. Orla knew that the only way to break the enchantment was to distract the mushrooms long enough for the fox to escape. Orla closed her eyes and began to hum a low, melodic tune. It was an ancient song, one that had been passed down through generations of owls. The melody was haunting yet beautiful, and as Orla sang, the glow of the mushrooms began to flicker. The mushrooms swayed slightly, their attention shifting from the fox to the sound of Orla's song. "Now," Orla said, opening her eyes and nodding to the fox. "Run quickly." The young fox leaped from the pond, dashing past the mushrooms and out of the clearing. Orla continued to sing until she was sure the fox was safe. Then, with a final note, she stopped, and the clearing fell silent once more. The mushroom's glow faded, and the eerie light disappeared, leaving only the faint reflection of the stars in the pond. Orla took a deep breath, her heart calming as she prepared to leave the clearing. Just as she was about to take off, she heard a voice, soft, almost like a whisper in the wind. "Thank you, Orla," the voice said. Orla turned and saw the fox standing at the edge of the clearing, its eyes filled with gratitude. "I would have been trapped until dawn if it weren't for you. How did you know what to do?" Orla smiled, her golden eyes glinting in the darkness. "Wisdom comes not from knowing all the answers, but from understanding the world around you," she said. "Sometimes, the best way to face a challenge is to use what you already have within you, in this case, a song." The fox nodded, its fear replaced with admiration. "I will never forget this night," it said. "You have taught me that even in the darkest of times, there is always a way out if we stay calm and use what we have." Orla watched as the young fox disappeared into the forest, its steps lighter and more confident. She felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that her midnight journey had not only saved the fox, but had also taught an important lesson. The forest was full of mysteries, but it was also full of answers, waiting for those who were willing to seek them. As Orla flew back to her oak tree, the first light of dawn began to touch the horizon. She knew that the forest would soon wake up, and life would continue as usual. But for Orla, the night had been anything but ordinary. She had once again been reminded that true wisdom was not about power or knowledge. It was about compassion, courage, and using the gifts one had been given. And as she settled back into her hollow, Orla closed her eyes, ready to rest, knowing that the forest was a little safer and a little wiser because of her midnight journey. The lion learns humility. In the heart of the African savanna, there lived a proud lion named Leo. Leo was the king of the savanna, and he knew it. With his powerful roar and his impressive mane, Leo commanded respect from all the animals. He often strutted through the grasslands, reminding everyone of his strength and dominance. The zebras, antelopes, and even the elephants gave way to him, bowing their heads in acknowledgement. Leo loved the attention, and he believed that no one could ever challenge his rule. One hot afternoon, as Leo rested under a tall acacia tree, he noticed a small meerkat scurrying nearby. The meerkat, named Miko, was busy gathering food for his family. Leo watched with a smirk as Miko hurried about, carrying berries and insects back to his burrow. Amused by the meerkat's frantic movements, Leo decided to have some fun. "Hey, you there!" Leo called out, his deep voice echoing across the savanna. Miko froze, turning to face the lion. His eyes widened with fear, but he stood still, trying not to show his nervousness. "Why do you work so hard, little meerkat?" Leo asked, a hint of mockery in his tone. "Look at you, running around all day just to gather a few berries. I, on the other hand, rest under this tree and still get everything I need. Perhaps you should learn to be more like me." Miko hesitated, then spoke softly. "I work hard because my family depends on me, Your Majesty. We may be small, but we do our best to take care of each other." Leo laughed, a deep, rumbling sound. "Family? Hard work? What nonsense! Power is what matters. Strength is what makes life easy." With that, Leo closed his eyes, dismissing Miko and returning to his nap. Days later, a severe drought struck the savanna. The once lush grass turned brown, and the watering holes began to dry up. Food became scarce, and the animals grew anxious. Leo, who had always relied on his strength to hunt, found himself struggling. The herds of antelopes and zebras had moved to distant areas in search of water, and the smaller animals had hidden away. For the first time in his life, Leo felt the pangs of hunger and the weakness that came with it. One evening, as Leo wandered the dry savanna, his stomach growling, he stumbled upon Miko's burrow. The meerkat was just returning home, his arms full of berries and roots. When Miko saw the state Leo was in, he paused. The once mighty lion looked thin, his mane ragged, and his eyes dull with exhaustion. Leo lowered his head, his pride wounded. "Miko," he said quietly, I need your help. I have no food, and I don't know how much longer I can survive like this." Miko looked at Leo for a long moment, then nodded. Despite the lion's previous arrogance, Miko could see that Leo was truly in need. "Come with me," Miko said, leading Leo to his burrow. Inside, Miko shared his food, berries, roots, and insects with the hungry lion. Leo ate slowly, his heart heavy with shame. He had mocked Miko for his hard work. Yet now it was that very hard work that was saving him. After they had eaten, Leo looked at Miko, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I was wrong," he admitted. "I thought that strength and power were all that mattered. But I see now that there is value in hard work, in caring for others, and in humility. You, Miko, are stronger than I ever was, not because of your size, but because of your heart." Miko smiled. "We all have our strengths, Leo. True power isn't about dominating others. It's about knowing when to ask for help and being willing to learn." From that day on, Leo changed. He no longer walked through the savannah with arrogance. Instead, he treated the other animals with respect, understanding that every creature, no matter how small, had something valuable to offer. He even helped Miko and the other meerkats gather food, using his strength to move rocks and dig for roots that were otherwise out of reach. The rains eventually returned, and the savannah flourished once more. But Leo never forgot the lesson he had learned during the drought. He had been the king of the savannah, but it was humility that had truly made him strong. And as he watched the animals thrive, each contributing in their own way, Leo knew that true leadership was not about power. It was about understanding, respect, and the willingness to learn from even the smallest among them. Trusting the quiet tortoise. In a lush forest filled with tall trees and vibrant flowers, there lived a group of animals who were always busy. They loved to compete with each other, showing off their speed, strength, and cleverness. Among them was Toby, a quiet tortoise who rarely joined in the contests. He preferred to spend his time slowly walking through the forest, observing the beauty around him, and enjoying the peace and quiet. The other animals often teased Toby for his slowness. "Hey, Toby, why don't you try to keep up with us?" Laughed Rocco, the fox. "You'll never be able to do anything important if you move at that pace." Toby would just smile and continue his slow journey, never letting the teasing bother him. He knew that everyone had their own pace, and he was comfortable with his. But deep down, he wished the other animals could see that there was more to life than speed and competition. One day, a great challenge was announced in the forest. A fierce storm had washed away the bridge that connected the two sides of the forest, and without it, the animals couldn't reach the river for water or the meadows for food. The animals gathered, discussing how they could solve the problem. Rocco the fox, Bella the squirrel, and Max the hare all boasted about their skills, each claiming they could fix the bridge the fastest. "I'll run to the far side and gather the strongest branches," Max declared, his ears twitching with excitement. "And I'll climb the tallest trees to get the vines we need," added Bella, her bushy tail flicking proudly. Rocco grinned. "And I'll use my cleverness to put it all together. We'll have that bridge rebuilt in no time." The animals cheered, confident in their plan, but Toby, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "I think we should take our time and plan carefully," he said. "The storm made the ground unstable, and we need to make sure the bridge is strong enough to last." Rocco rolled his eyes. "Oh, Toby, you're always so cautious. We don't have time to waste. We need to act fast." The other animals agreed, and they rushed off to start their work. Max sprinted to gather branches. Bella climbed trees to cut down vines, and Rocco began assembling the pieces, determined to show off his cleverness. They worked quickly, and by the end of the day, the bridge was complete. The animals cheered, proud of their accomplishment. But that night, the wind picked up again, and rain began to fall. The hastily built bridge, which had looked so strong, began to sway. The branches were not secured properly, and the vines were too thin to hold the weight. By morning, the bridge had collapsed, washed away by the river once more. The animals gathered at the riverbank disheartened. All their hard work had been for nothing. They looked at each other, unsure of what to do next. Then they turned to Toby, who had been quietly observing from a distance. "Toby," Rocco said, his voice humbled, "maybe you were right. We should have listened to you. Will you help us rebuild the bridge?" Toby nodded, a gentle smile on his face. "Of course," he said, "but this time we will do it slowly and carefully. We need to make sure it's strong enough to withstand whatever comes our way." Under Toby's guidance, the animals began their work again. This time, they took their time. Toby showed them how to choose the right branches, ones that were thick and sturdy, and how to weave the vines tightly to hold everything together. They worked together, each animal contributing in their own way, but following Toby's careful plan. Days passed, and the bridge slowly took shape. It wasn't as quick as the first time, but it was steady, and everyone could see that it was much stronger. When they finally finished, the animals stood back and admired their work. The bridge was sturdy and secure, ready to withstand whatever challenges lay ahead. The next storm that came was even fiercer than the last, but this time, the bridge held strong. The animals cheered, grateful for Toby's wisdom and patience. They realized that sometimes the quietest among them had the most important things to say. Rocco approached Toby, his head bowed. "Thank you, Toby," he said. "We were wrong to dismiss you. You taught us that speed isn't everything. Sometimes, taking our time and doing things right is what truly matters." Toby smiled, his eyes twinkling. "We all have something to contribute," he said. "And sometimes the best way forward is to move slowly, making sure every step is secure." From that day on, the animals of the forest learned to respect Toby's quiet wisdom. They understood that true strength wasn't always about speed or cleverness. Sometimes it was about patience, careful planning, and trusting those who saw the world differently. And as they crossed the sturdy bridge one by one, they knew they had learned an invaluable lesson from the quiet tortoise. Friendship in the storm. In a small seaside village, there lived two friends named Sam and Ben. They had known each other since childhood, and their bond was as strong as the tides that washed up on the shore every day. Sam worked as a fisherman, while Ben owned a small shop that sold supplies to the villagers. Though they led different lives, they were always there for each other, sharing laughter, worries, and even the occasional argument. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the weather began to change. Dark clouds rolled in and the wind picked up, howling through the narrow streets of the village. Sam was out at sea, his boat rocking against the rising waves. He had been fishing all day, and by the time he noticed the storm brewing, it was too late to turn back. The sea had grown angry, and the waves crashed against his boat, threatening to pull him under. Back in the village, Ben watched the storm with growing concern. He knew Sam was out there, battling the waves. Ben's heart pounded with worry. He couldn't just stay back and do nothing. He grabbed a lantern, put on his raincoat, and made his way to the docks. The wind whipped at his face, and the rain pelted down, but Ben didn't care. He had to help his friend. At the docks, Ben found a small boat tied to the pier. Without hesitation, he untied it and pushed off into the stormy sea. The waves were fierce, and the boat rocked violently, but Ben kept going, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of Sam. He shouted his friend's name, his voice barely audible over the roar of the wind and waves. Meanwhile, Sam was struggling to keep his boat afloat. Water splashed over the sides, and the sail was torn by the wind. He was exhausted, his muscles aching from fighting the storm. Just as he began to lose hope, he heard a faint voice calling his name. He looked up, squinting through the rain, and saw a flickering light in the distance. It was Ben coming to save him. Tears filled Sam's eyes as he realized his friend had risked his life to come after him. With renewed determination, Sam grabbed the rope and tied it securely to his boat. Ben pulled with all his strength, the waves battering them both, but inch by inch, he managed to tow Sam's boat closer to the shore. It was a struggle that seemed to last forever, but finally, they made it back to the safety of the docks. Once on solid ground, Sam collapsed, breathing heavily. Ben knelt beside him, his face pale but relieved. "You're safe now," Ben said, his voice hoarse from shouting. Sam looked up at his friend, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You saved my life," he whispered. I don't know how to thank you." Ben smiled, his eyes wet with tears. "That's what friends are for," he said simply. The two friends sat there on the dock, rain still pouring down, but they didn't care. They had faced a storm together, and that was all that mattered. The next day, the storm had passed, and the sun shone brightly over the village. The sea was calm again, and the villagers went about their usual routines. But something had changed. Word of Ben's bravery had spread, and the villagers looked at him with admiration. They knew that true friendship was rare, and what Ben had done for Sam was a testament to the strength of their bond. Sam, too, had changed. He had always been independent, believing he could handle anything on his own. But the storm had shown him that sometimes, even the strongest need a helping hand. He realized that true strength wasn't about facing challenges alone. It was about having someone by your side when things got tough. That evening, Sam and Ben sat on the beach, watching the sunset. They didn't need to say much. Their friendship had grown even deeper after the storm. Just as the sun disappeared below the horizon, Ben turned to Sam and said, "You know, I never thought I'd be brave enough to face a storm like that. But when I knew you were out there, I couldn't just sit back." Sam smiled, his eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. "And I never thought I'd need someone to save me," he replied. "But I'm glad it was you." The two friends laughed, their voices carried away by the gentle breeze. The storm had tested their friendship, and they had come through it stronger than ever. It was a reminder that true friendship wasn't just about the good times. It was about standing by each other when the waves were high and the world seemed dark. And as the stars began to twinkle above, Sam and Ben knew that whatever storms life might bring in the future, they would face them together, side by side. Bravery Little Mouse. Once upon a time, in a small corner of the forest, there lived a little mouse named Milo. Milo was not like the other animals in the forest. He was small, timid, and often stayed close to his tiny burrow to avoid trouble. Milo knew the forest was full of dangers, from sly foxes to swooping hawks, and he preferred to keep his distance from anything that could cause him harm. But deep down, Milo wished he could be brave like the other animals, who seemed to face challenges without fear. One bright morning, Milo was out gathering seeds when he heard a terrible noise. It was a roar, loud and filled with pain. Milo's tiny heart skipped a beat, and he quickly hid behind a bush. Peeking through the leaves, he saw something that made his whiskers tremble. The mighty lion, the king of the forest, was lying on the ground, struggling. His paw was caught in a hunter's trap, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't free himself. Milo watched as the lion roared again, the sound echoing through the forest. The other animals stayed away, too frightened to approach the powerful beast in his moment of distress. Milo's instincts told him to run back to his burrow and hide, But something made him stay. He could see the pain in the lion's eyes, and he knew that if no one helped, the lion would be in serious danger. Milo took a deep breath. He knew this was his chance to be brave, to do something that mattered. Slowly, he crept out from behind the bush and approached the lion. The closer he got, the more his tiny paws shook, but he didn't stop. The lion noticed Milo and bared his teeth, his eyes fierce. "Stay back, little mouse," the lion growled. "I am dangerous." Milo swallowed his fear and spoke in a small but steady voice. "I want to help you," he said. The lion looked at him in surprise. No one had dared to come close, and here was this tiny mouse offering help. With careful steps, Milo approached the trap. It was a metal snare, tied around the lion's paw. Milo examined it closely, his small eyes focused. He knew his teeth were sharp enough to gnaw through the rope that held the trap together. Without another word, Milo began to chew. It was hard work, and Milo's jaw ached, but he kept going, driven by a sense of purpose he had never felt before. The lion watched, his growls turning into soft murmurs of hope. After what felt like hours, Milo finally managed to bite to the last piece of rope. The trap fell open, and the lion pulled his paw free. He stood up, towering over Milo, and shook his mane. For a moment, Milo thought the lion might still be angry, but then the lion bowed his head. "Thank you, little one," the lion said, his voice filled with gratitude. "You have saved my life. I owe you a great debt." Milo smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "I just did what I could," he replied. The lion nodded and said, "From now on, you shall have my protection. No harm will come to you in this forest, I promise." Word of Milo's bravery spread throughout the forest. The other animals, who had once overlooked Milo because of his size, now admired him. They saw that true courage wasn't about being big or strong. It was about facing fear and doing what was right, even when it was scary. Milo returned to his burrow that evening, feeling different. He was still small, but he no longer felt insignificant. He knew that even the smallest creature could make a big difference. But the story didn't end there. A few days later, Milo was out again, this time gathering berries. He heard a rustling in the bushes and turned to see a fox watching him, its eyes glinting with mischief. The fox licked its lips and took a step forward, ready to pounce. Milo's heart began to race, but before he could react, there was a sudden, thunderous roar. The fox froze, its eyes widening in terror. From the shadows emerged the lion, his mane glowing in the sunlight. The fox didn't wait. It turned and bolted, disappearing into the forest. The lion looked down at Milo and smiled. "I told you, little one, no harm will come to you," he said. Milo's eyes filled with gratitude. He realized that his bravery had not only saved the lion, but had also earned him a powerful friend. And in that moment, Milo knew that true courage was rewarded in the most unexpected ways.